Welcome to the Charter Oak Chess Club's YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going over a game played by Salo Flohr, who uses his brilliant endgame technique to win. Enjoy. Rafael Domenech has the white pieces, and Salo Flohr has the black pieces in this game. And it starts out with a Sicilian defense with pawn to e4, pawn to c5, and then knight to f3, pawn to e6, and then pawn to c4. So Rafael is going for this Maroczy bind kind of structure with the knight in the center and the pawn on either side. But d4 should come first. d4 is just better. So knight to c6, d4 takes, and now knight to f6, attacking the pawn, and it's a hard pawn to defend. So white decides to take here. If they went for knight to c3, then bishop b4 might be a problem, because that knight is pinned, we're attacking the pawn, and if we try to defend the pawn, then we can capture the knight and create these double isolated pawns. So instead, white decides to capture, and then pause the video and decide, how are you going to take this knight back? Are you going to take with b pawn or take with the d pawn? Now you could probably make an argument for both, but in the game, Flohr decided to take with the d pawn and exchange queens. Now if we take with the b pawn, the one good news is white doesn't get the chance to play pawn to e5, attacking the knight and taking control of this d6 square, because black can simply get this fork and recapture the pawn. So either one is fine, but Flohr decides to trade the queens, and after trading the queens, you'll notice black can't castle, and black does not care, because when the queens are off the board, you're not going to get checkmated, and you're moving towards an endgame, so don't have that king in the corner. Instead, keep that king close by where it can run into the center when it needs to. Alright, so pawn to f3, which is a great way to defend the pawn and to make sure that that knight can't move. e5 would not really work here because the pawn just creates too many problems. So the knight attacks the pawn. If white tries to defend somehow, now we go after this f2 square. If we try to defend more, the bishop comes to d4, and now we're going to pick up a pawn. And we can't try to move the pawn out of the way because the knight starts to attack the rook, and we're going to win the rook for the knight here. So pushing the pawn can't happen yet. So first white has to play f3. Now they can push the pawn because they've stopped the mobility of the knight. So if you're playing here as black, one little move is going to help a lot, and that is pawn to e5. With pawn to e5, your bishop has gone from the bad bishop to the good bishop now because your pawn is on the dark squares, so we can move that to e6. Also, we've stopped e5 from ever coming on the board, and we take control of the d4 square. All right, white develops their bishop. We move our king. Pawn to a3. This is actually, I won't say it's a big mistake, but it is a mistake because it causes a slight weakness in white structure, and that weakness is on b3. There's a hole on b3, and we would love to get our knight to that outpost. The reason they play a3 is to stop the bishop from moving, so they didn't want to play knight c3 and then bishop pins, but this is totally fine. Don't play a3 now, just bring your rook over to defend. And your king's going to move to the side anyways, so this would have been a totally fine way to play. It's a little bit annoying, but it's really no big deal. But by playing a3 first, black is able to take this knight and say, how can I get this knight over to this square? Well, I could hop here, here, and here. So that's exactly what Flohr decided to do. Knight to d7, knight to d2, and we are defending against the b3 square. And then black plays pawn to a5, stopping white from moving that pawn. They can't go here because we will take, and there's a pin. Bishop moves out, and now a4 is a great way to guard that b3 square, and now it's under black's control. So king goes to f2. You'll notice that the king did not castle just because it's the same position, but your king is a little further away. So if you want to connect your rooks, just king to f2. Again, this is getting towards an endgame. And as black, you say, wow, this bishop is really bad for white. This light squared bishop. Look at all the pawns on the light squares. And that means the dark squared bishop must be really good. It has a lot more mobility than the light squared bishop. So if my pawn's on a dark square, this is going to be my bad bishop. I'm going to trade off now. And what a perfect time to do so, because the king is on f2. We're pinning the bishop to the king. They have to trade. And that's exactly what happens. And the knight is one step closer to attacking here. And then the rook comes over here. Let's develop that bishop finally. Rook comes to the center. Rook comes to the center. They're both going for the open file. And it looks like it's pretty even, but black has pretty much won this open file. And the reason for that is how is white going to make sure that they can double their rooks? There's really no way, right? The knight's hitting here, so we can't get the rook over here. If they try to fight for it by moving their knight and exchanging, then we're able to get to the b3 square and attack their rook. So after capture, capture, and now the rook's still attacked, so it moves over here, capture, capture. Yes, white has neutralized the threat of the open file, but they've also lost a pawn in the process. So there's no good way for white to fight for this open file. So instead they play king to e3, getting their king into the center to help take away some of these squares. And the rook's going to double. And white is tired of their bishop being horrific in this game. So they decide, I'm going to move these light squared pawns and put them on dark squares. And at least my bishop will be able to move after that. We continue to double our rooks. And the pawn goes to f4. And now Flohr realizes he is winning big time. So take, what would you play here? So Flohr decides, I can take this rook and go check. And yes, I'm going to sacrifice it, but it's totally going to be worth it. If you just move the king away, I'm going to take the knight. So you have to capture. And then the rook captures with check. It's defended by the knight. The king has two options. So the king in the game went f2. But if e2, we're going to play bishop to g4. We're getting the skewer. But remember, this just gets our material back. So we haven't won it back yet. It's just going to be even. And no matter how the king or rook captures, black is going to have a way to pick up some pawns here. So let's look at the king first. The king goes here. The knight's going to take. Rook's going to come to defend because the knight is pinned. And now we can just exchange. And notice how we're exchanging with the rook, so it has check, and white has to capture back. And now black has only won a pawn, but it's two isolated pawns against three pawns, and it's black to move, so we could play king to d6. And three pawns against three pawns, nothing's going to happen on this side. So black will be able to win this endgame pretty comfortably, especially if they're a grandmaster. But even if they're not a grandmaster, they should win that game every single time. Now let's say the rook takes. Okay, if the rook takes, we are taking this e4 pawn for free. And if the knight tries to capture back, we actually get a fork. And then we get another fork. So we're actually going to pick up two pawns here. The rook can't come to the 7th rank because the king is guarding. And again, this is a complete win for black. So white didn't like this one, so they put their king on f2. And black says, I don't care. I'm still going to put my bishop on g4 and attack your rook. And it's zugzwang. There's no good move for white to play. If they go this way to attack the bishop, we pick up the knight with check. And we are up to exchange. If they decide I'm going to block, and now my rooks are covered, well, your rooks are covered, but your knight is not covered, right? We have two attackers, one defender. We can take here, and again, we are up the exchange. And then if you just move the rook away as a waiting move, because you still have the rook for the bishop right now, then we get this exchange. And now, again, we always want to simplify. Normally, we're moving knight here because of the pin. But here, we can just take the knight right away, get check, and white is winning for a moment, but now it is a fork, and we've already picked up the pawn. This position should look really familiar. 3 pawns against 2 with black to move. And again, it's a win. So there's no good moves to play. So white decides, well, I might as well play e5, try to push this pawn up the board. And now the knight can't capture it. And we have take. And how would you win this endgame for black? So it looks like we could just play knight to b3 because we have the pin. And after here, we're going to force to trade with the rooks. And it is black to move, but it's completely drawn because it's 3 pawns against 3 pawns. Both the kings are on the 2nd rank, and it's just going to be a draw. White's going to be able to defend very well. So we need to create some weaknesses. So Flohr decides, how can I do that? Well, let's go after this pawn with knight to e6. And how are you going to defend? Because rook's cutting out the king, the knight is pinned, and the rook can't do anything. So they push the pawn. And now, knight d4, attacking the pawn again. You have to push the pawn, take. And now we're going to go for the same structure as before, where we're going to win this knight. Capture with the rook, force to trade. And in this position, Flohr played king to d6, and his opponent played the best move, which is to resign, because now the pawn is all the way over here. And Black's going to get there first, and they're going to have a passed pawn, and they're going to win the game. And if you're an inexperienced player with endgames, and you're wondering why is this one, well, first of all, you just figure out who takes the pawn first. But I like the way the book describes it, where instead of giving a bunch of lines where Black will win every time, it says, how is White going to win? Well, if everything goes right, you would have to get rid of 2 pawns. Because you can't just get rid of 1 pawn, because then these 2 pawns are both stopped by this b pawn. So you need to get rid of 2 pawns as White. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then the king's got to move away so you can move your pawn. 7. Then 8, 9, 10, 11. Or if they go this way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they move this pawn now, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 11 moves to get a queen. And for Black, it's 1, 2, move the king out of the way, 3. And then his pawn can go 2 on his first move, so 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So only 8 moves for Black to promote their pawn. So any way you play this game, Black is going to easily win the endgame. And it's all because Flohr made sure to take his time and make little weaknesses before trading off all the pieces. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to get new chess content every week. Have you played a great game of chess recently? Feel free to email to us and we'll go through it during our next video.